So I am going to turn the floor to the moderator of this panel, Ilyana Lazarova, Senior ESG Analyst at the Pension Protection Fund, to introduce the panelists and the topic of the panel in a bit more depth. So Ilyana, over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the next panel, which is Internal Metrics to Shift Corporate Strategy Towards Decarbonization. My name is Ilyana Lazarova. I am a Senior ESG Analyst with the Pension Protection Fund, which is a public corporation which protects millions of people with defined benefit pensions in the UK, managing 38 billion of Great British pounds. So I bring some of the investor perspective today, and I'm glad to be joined by 5 fantastic panelists, and we'll dive into how and what are the metrics to shift successfully corporate strategy and to align it with climate. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Flemming Voltman, a VP of Marketing, Communication and Sustainability of FL Smith, Eva Musso, Head of Sustainability and Government Relations at the chemical conglomerate BASF, Margaret Hendry, Director of Sustainable Agriculture at PepsiCo, well-known producer of beverages, Katarina Fjording, Head of Sustainability in America for Volvo Cars, a company at the forefront of the automotive industry, leading the way in sustainability, and Gonzalo Sáenz de Miera, Director of Climate Change at Iberdrola. Welcome all, and thank you for taking the time to share your perspective and successes in moving corporate strategy. So without further ado, I would straight go to Gonzalo to share with us what are the necessary enablers in rethinking, executing on a pivot in corporate strategy. There are clearly a lot of stakeholders involved. So is it patient investors, faithful clients, or for forward-looking and prudent policymakers, all of the above?
Ilyana, Gonzalo was there. He must have a connection problem. I'm sure he will be reconnecting in a few seconds, but it's not on right now. He's coming back on. Perfect.
I did see him. Gonzalo, can you hear us now?
Yes. Thank you, Ilyana.
Okay. Well, I would repeat my question to you because
sorry.
No problem. The world of Zoom. So kicking off our discussion today on how to shift corporate strategy, what, in your opinion, are the necessary enablers in rethinking and executing on a pivot in corporate strategy? What's the role of patient investors, policymakers, as well as your clients and customers?
Okay, thank you very much, Ilyana, and congratulations for organizing such an interesting event. For me, the most important enabler is policies. I mean, in the energy sector, we have the technology to decarbonize. Firms, we are ready to invest. Finance is not a problem. What we need are objectives, public objectives, long and intermediate objectives, and policies that lead investment in this direction. So for us, it is essential to move forward in 3 areas. The first is ambitious approach towards climate goals. We need ambitious goals for 2050 for different countries or regions. We need intermediate targets aligned with climate neutrality by 2050. For instance, Europe has defined an intermediate objective that is extremely interesting, minus 55 emissions compared with 1990 for 2030. And we need reinforced collaboration between players at global level. So the first thing is goals. The second thing is enabling policy environment to accelerate investment. So we need a stable and robust regulatory frameworks aligned with these objectives. I'm talking about fiscal policies, economic policies, fair transition policies. We also need in this area a smooth administrative and permitting process for green investment. So we need to decarbonize very fast. We need to accelerate investment, and this is a problem nowadays in a lot of countries. We need public and private collaboration and enabling policy environment for energy infrastructures. We need fine-tuned electricity market design to accommodate high share of renewables. And the final thing for me is that we need robust carbon price signals and taxation, not just on CO2, but on, for instance, on polluting other pollutants, based on the polluter pays principle. So we need a complete revision of the taxation to align it with climate targets and to avoid distortions. For instance, now in Europe, if you drive an electricity car, you pay for CO2 because the electricity sector is in the ETS. However, if you drive a diesel car that is much more polluted, you don't pay for CO2 emissions because the transport sector is not included in the ETS. This is a distortion and we have to solve. Summarizing, we have the technologies, we are ready to invest, finance is not a problem. What we need or the enablers are goals and policies that lead investment in this direction. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Gonzalo. That's a lot of food for thought. I think we'll come to the carbon price probably in an open discussion towards the Q&A, and also for the audience, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or the Q&A. You raise important points there on kind of the ambitious goals, but I guess another aspect of how goals are set and how we move towards them is transparency, and I know that the pressure is on for both corporates and investors to disclose. So in order to achieve the goals, I guess we need information. So with that, I'm curious to hear from Fleming and from Eva on how do you tackle integrating different reporting frameworks and such as the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, well known to everyone at this point, hopefully, CDP, TPI, the Transition Pathway Initiative, and regulatory requirements, probably increasingly. So over to you, Fleming.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks very much, and thank you very much for hosting, I think, this very, very timely event. I think it's a great initiative. So just 2 words about FLSmidth. So we are the prime provider of technology for the global mining and cement industry. So we do sort of a full flow sheet technology for both these industries. And these are, of course, 2 industries that are the backbone of modern society, but you can say the flip side, unfortunately, both to cement and mining is, of course, also that they have very significant emissions to themselves. And we, as a technology provider, have promised that by 2030 we will have zero emission technology ready for both industries, which is it's a stretch target, but we need to be ambitious, and time, of course, is of importance. So then to your question, we're a listed company and we're headquartered in Denmark. So, you need to follow a little bit of the logic, of course, what are the regulatory framework and all of that, but also being a listed company, the amount of questions we get from our own investors, but also the analysts that follow the share is just kind of like almost growing every week. So you can say that the entire workload behind that is just increasing tremendously. And some of it, of course, what we're looking for is, of course, what's most relevant to our industry, to our investors. And of course, we're also trying to look for a certain level of cross-recognition between some of the different initiatives. So one of the things that is key for us is science-based targets. So we signed up to that. We had the targets approved. And I can come back to that at a later stage, but that of course is a lot of work going into that. Luckily, there is, from a reporting point of view and internal alignment point of view, I would say a certain level of overlap with the EU taxonomy, which for us, based inside the European Union, now becomes mandatory by law by 1st of January. So we're looking for, again, where these overlap. But for our investors and analysts, what they also follow quite a lot is that they would follow the schemes like the MSCI, CDP, Sustainalytics, etc., right? And of course, they're not always super well aligned. So that's kind of, you can say, a little bit what gives us the headache, is try to kind of cater for all the different needs of these different institutions. And one of the things that is not helpful, a lot of this is great, some of the things that's not helpful is that some of the major banks and other institutions come up with their own definition of what is sustainability, their own way of measuring it, right? There, I think we all need to pause for a second and kind of say, let's not reinvent the wheel here, right? Because, at my end, I could hire an extra person to do investor relations every week just to kind of cater to all those needs. And that, of course, is not helpful, right? We need to do other things, first and foremost, sell sustainability equipment and not to do reporting, right? So there we all need to kind of say, okay, fair enough, let's work with what we have and make the most out of that. And also, of course, making sure that we have schemes to actually compare apples with apples. So that means that if all the pension funds, all the big banks, investment institutions come up with their own criteria, that is not going to be helpful. So again, we're strong believers in the science-based targets. We've done the TCFD ourselves. We think that's a great framework. We think this is pretty well aligned also with the EU taxonomy and some of the other things. But we also made a lot of choices of things that we don't do. And that's a tough one because we have a lot of investors all over the globe that come back to us and say, yeah, but why is your ranking so poorly and under that scheme and so on, right? But we can't do it all. So we need to make some tough choices. And again, we sided with the ones that makes the most sense for us. So that's kind of like, I think, the short introduction of where we're at.
Thank you, Flemming. I guess if one takeaway for me is that greater convergence of standards is necessary to allow better metrics, and definitely work being done in that field. What is your perspective on that topic, Eva? Similar challenges, I can imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So first, thank you, Ileana, and thank you everyone for watching today, and honored to join this panel. So yeah, at BASF Canada, it's really important that we track and that we accurately measure and understand, our impact. Obviously, not just at BASF, but I think it's important for every company. For us, it also helps us to kind of steer those business decisions. So one thing, as a member of the chemical industry, we report to Responsible Care, which is a global voluntary initiative that encourages continuous improvement in environmental health and safety. So that helps us to kind of benchmark ourselves against others within the same industry. But going beyond that, so I think that same thinking of that, there were a lot of standards out there and they all have pros and cons. So in 2019, BASF co-launched an initiative called the Value Balancing Alliance. And that is open to any kind of company, and it helps them to measure and understand their impact on the environment. But the really interesting thing about the Value Balancing Alliance is that it converts social and environmental metrics to financial terms. So you can put them all on a balance sheet where you would have only traditionally had your financial metrics, but now you've got your social and your environmental metrics as well, and so you can really compare them. Excuse me. So you're not looking at apples and oranges. Sorry. So you can compare both your financial and your non-financial targets in a way that makes, they're all kind of using the same metric. So we were able to monetize in dollar figures and then integrate that right into our financial reporting instead of having a, standalone, here's our financial report and here's our, sustainability report. So we find that super helpful in helping to drive our business decisions. I think it's really important to have, I would echo what Flemming said. I think it's really important to have something standardized, where you can have transparency and you can have consistency. And then, that's really the best way to measure yourself against others, regardless of what industry they're in.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Eva. And it's, I think, an important point to that comparability with financial metrics and further alignment as to really putting the price on that natural capital that is is part of the operations. So talking about the different metrics that can help us further propel change, I'd like to go to Katarina to get perspective on another framework in existence, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that kind of what is your opinion and how useful are they, Katarina, for measuring and for aligning corporate strategy change?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting Volvo Cars to be part of this. I apologize for my poor voice. I'm losing it. To your question, the answer is yes, it is useful. As a high-level global direction, sustainability development goals are good as an initiative to drive us to work towards a common goal globally. And it also lives in the intersection between economic development and environmental and societal aspects. So they provide guidelines for high-level target setting as well. With that said, of course, I wouldn't call it downsides, but what's important is and also hard is to drive accountability around this globally. Obviously, and Fleming touched a little bit on that. Everyone wants to innovate their own thing and innovate the wheel again, how to measure to make it easier. So I think this blueprint, this framework is good. What you need to know is that you have to yourself derive a more sophisticated subset of that fits your operation. So you deliver within that framework towards your individual goals that feeds that overarching goal. And then also you need to develop the process on how to go about that in your company. So it doesn't really spell that out. So those who read it like the devil reads the Bible, I think that is not the goal. It's the overarching framework, and you have to understand how to live within that one and deliver within that one.
Yeah, from the investor perspective, I'm kind of very, it's always tricky to understand to what level of detail companies have gone into, to your point, Katarina, that it's probably more useful as a high level.
Yeah, but to comment on that then, we issued green bonds recently, and companies like BlackRock are very happy to invest in corporations who have a transparent and very conscientious sustainability agenda, and also actions, credible actions to back that up. So I think that if you have actions and target settings and you're transparent about reporting it and what you're doing within that, you can attract investors who are interested in sustainability.
Certainly, and again, kind of green bonds and SDG linked bonds, for example, I think it's will be critical for to have transparency and to show that action and where money are spent. And we've touched already a couple of times, Fleming said, mentioned the science-based target initiative and the targets that you've set, and the previous panel talked about the scopes and carbon accounting. So going to a thorny and yet really important issue about Scope 3 emissions and how important and how tangible are they in setting a climate science-based target. And I would love to hear your perspective, Fleming, and then also hear from Margaret, given that Scope 3 in agriculture is also essential.
Margaret, do you want to go first?
As you wish. Take it away, Fleming, and I'll follow you.
No, okay. So I think that, you could say we're a little bit of an interesting case, you can say, when we talk about Scope 1, 2, and 3, because actually 99% of all of our emissions are Scope 3, out of which 95% sit with our customers, given the nature of the cement and mining industry. So again, our own emissions is less than 1%, and there we you can say we kind of committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. We think that's kind of, you know, the least we could do, given literally the small size, relatively speaking, of our own emissions. So what we have committed to is to help improve our customers' emissions with 7.5% year on year. And that again is kind of under the nature of science-based targets. You could say kind of backward engineering what would be our fair share, right? We of course hope to kind of exceed that 7.5% reductions emissions. That goes without saying, because that of course also would be good for our business, because that is the equipment we're basically selling. And I think it's also important maybe to stress when we talk about, you can say, industrial energy efficiency or emissions reduction, is that if you didn't do anything, you probably, if you're really lucky, might achieve 1.5%. So sometimes people say 7.5 doesn't seem like a whole lot. Yeah, but again, if you don't do anything, you know, but based on what you already have in place, you get 1.5. So then 7.5 all of a sudden is actually quite a lot. And of course, for us, the challenging thing is that we work in industries where you have equipment in place for, I would say, on average, 25 to 40 years. So that also means that you install equipment in a new copper mine in Chile or a lithium mine in Nevada or where else you are, right? You put in the equipment and then the equipment sits there for the next 40 years. But then that goes to another point, which is extremely important. Also now we look at Corp and some of the other initiatives, whether it's Brussels or DC, is that, you know, we can't really miss this opportunity to get these investments right. Because again, given that the equipment is going to be there for such a long time, if we miss out on one of these investment windows, you know, we're going to, you know, do future generations a huge disfavor, right? So it's right now we need to do this. And the industries have agreed, most of them, to decarbonize, but that also means they need to, you know, put their money where their mouth is right now, given again the nature of sort of the longevity of these industries. So that's important. Internally, it's been super difficult to explain to a lot of our guys what is scope 1, 2, and 3, and what is the scope 3, upstream, downstream, all of that. I think we spend a lot of effort on super simple infographics and all of that, because at the end of the day, you know, the key thing for me is to sell stuff to the customers. And I only do that if I have 10,000 colleagues who support me every day. So they kind of need to understand some of the fundamentals. And that's, of course, where the sustainability language sometimes becomes a little bit sort of mumbo jumbo to these guys out there, right? And you know, we can smile at it, but we should not underestimate. Again, also sometimes, you know, we need to stick to that. And that is back to the previous point. It's not helpful then for me to get 10,000 colleagues on board to this if other guys now start another initiative with scope 4, or we have biodiversity on top of this, because all of it is relevant, right? But that's not how organizations work, right? It takes a very, very long time to ensure the buy-in, to ensure the alignment and all of that. And so we cannot have every 3 months that well-meaning people come up with new things in addition, because we have hardly implemented what we already started. So I think that is also kind of a word of caution to all of us involved with this, because we like to do new things, but that could actually end up being counterproductive.
Well, I'll pick up, Fleming, from one of the really good points that you made of let's put our money where our mouth is. I think when it comes to scope 3 particularly, that is for so many companies where so much of the impact lies. Certainly for anyone in the food and beverage world, it is the vast majority of the impact is on the other side of what Fleming was speaking to. For us, it's the upstream. It's back at the farm. It's in the production of the raw materials that go into our products. And so when we at PepsiCo are thinking about this, we're absolutely thinking about how to accelerate action. And so when we're looking at this, we say we've been doing scope 1 and 2 for many, many years. We've been doing scope 3 for, you know, really deeply for around 5 years. And what is the impact we're seeing? Well, we're seeing that we can make really credible progress, 38% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions on the farms in our supply chain. And we're seeing that you do it a little bit differently when you're looking at a larger system. If we're looking at the food and beverage system, we can't do it alone. It's not an investment in a new piece of equipment in our own facilities. It is working with peer companies, governments, NGOs, the finance sector, lead innovators. It takes a very different form. And I'll just sketch out a little example to put a little color on that for you. Think about PepsiCo purchasing some corn for some of those delicious Doritos that you like, or potatoes for a delicious Walker's crisp that you may enjoy over there in the UK. Well, those farmers are growing something else in another season, perhaps soy for one of our peer companies, even one of our competitors. We need to send one message to that farmer. Just like we were talking about standards and the many messages to the many companies, we also need to send one message back to the raw materials, so those farmers know what is expected of them and what they can do. But then what about the government incentives? Can we align the kinds of financial and policy incentives those farmers receive so that they are incentivized on this journey of decarbonization on the farm? Yes, we absolutely can. Can we bring in innovative finance to recognize that farmers doing these climate smart practices can actually be more resilient and be a lower risk for the finance sector? Can you bring in the lead NGOs who can help to figure out exactly which kinds of things are needed for the most optimization of environmental benefits? This is collaboration at work at a landscape. And that's what's really critical for us moving forward, especially in the scope 3 arena, where we really need to work together. And it can't be any single entity's work all by themselves. I will throw out one challenge here, which is linked to another challenge that folks talk to, which is around robust and credible reporting. Particularly when you get to scope 3, there's an opportunity for just an explosion of time spent reporting and time spent verifying. We do not want to see 90% of the effort spent on reporting and 10% on actually making the change. And in scope 3, there's a tremendous opportunity for that to be a burden. And so we really like to see 90% of the effort spent on the change and 10% spent on sufficiently robust reporting, that we can actually see the progress that we all know that we need to start yesterday. So that's what we're trying to work on as PepsiCo pre-competitively in this collaborative way to try to harmonize some of those standards in the scope 3 world, which we know is absolutely critical to all of our industries.
Great points, Margaret. Thank you very much. I actually wanted to follow up just probably to both of you, because and you mentioned some of the things that can be used in engagement with, in your case, farmers, but then in Fleming's the case of FL Smith, kind of what can be incentives that you would offer down the supply chain for people to lower their scope 3 downstream emissions. So is a price differential a potential incentive, or obviously kind of government incentives, NGOs, just kind of where is the pressure going to come for the supply chain participants to help you in lowering or managing rather scope 3 emissions?
I think a couple of things. I think as we also heard from Iberdrola to begin with, right? So of course we need the economic incentive. There's just no way around it. Of course it has been, let's just be brutally honest, been almost free of charge to emit carbon, right? So again, within the framework at least of the European Union, at least now we have a 60 euro per ton of carbon that actually we can see have a huge impact on our customers. So you can see slowly that now they get it, right? So of course you need a reasonable pricing across the board. That is by far the most efficient thing. Having worked in this space for a very long time and also always promoted, you could say, best available technology, I also have to admit that over the years, one thing I've learned is also you should just ban other products, right? So yes, I'm all in favor of best available technology. That's what we do. But at the same time, you also need to kind of agree to basically get rid of inefficient technologies. And that's across the board, because otherwise we'll never get the job done, right? There's always somebody out there who wants to do a copy of our product from the 80s, and they can sell it many times cheaper than we could ever have produced it ourselves. That's the sad fact, right? So best available technology, but also let's eliminate the inefficient products across the entire range of everything that we do. And that product pruning, so to say, needs to follow simply what are the emissions associated with these products, right? Because again, we don't have a time to allow for a lot of really cheap, inefficient products, unfortunately, anymore. So I think that's key. What I think is great is that, you know, we work in the mining industry, so we help, you know, also deliver low carbon aluminum that can then be used for the cans that is used also by PepsiCo. but we also provide all the copper, the zinc, the nickel, and all the other products that is needed for what Katarina and Volvo Cars are doing in terms of revolutionizing electric vehicles, right? So that means that my customers' Scope 3 emissions eventually becomes Margaret's and Katarina's, Scope 3 emissions, and sometimes maybe even their Scope 1 and 2. So there actually now you can say that we're totally aligned eventually, and that's also why we need to stick to the same framework, not invent new things, right? And there it makes sense to have a supply chain thinking. And I think there the world also has matured quite a lot, I would say, just within the last couple of years to have a much better supply chain thinking. But it only works if we use the same metrics, right? So we actually do compare apples with apples.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And I would say that every part of a supply chain is subject increasingly to these same kinds of pressures. And finding stacked solutions is where we're going to find those wins. Understanding where you can make the business case all along a system for these kinds of actions, and where you can make both the carrot and the stick, to what Fleming was saying, work in favor of the change you want to see happening. But I also completely endorse Fleming's point that it can't just be financial incentives. We need to raise the floor as well as pushing on the ceiling at the same time. And that's absolutely critical in every kind of industry.
Great message, Margaret. I like that metaphor of raising the floor and lowering the ceiling. And it's great to see that you as leaders in the space are thinking in system thinking, because I think climate change in particular is a systems problem, but it's too big sometimes to think of the whole thing. But still, you have to consider all the aspects there. So I'm curious to hear kind of, obviously many things have been considered in terms of a carbon price and engagement with suppliers. And some of you have already set net zero targets. So what are the next steps for achieving net zero in the corporate journeys, I guess, in the short and the medium term? And would love to hear from Eva.
Sure, thank you.
To start with.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. So we do have set goals and targets for BASF globally. So our targets are to achieve net neutrality by 2050, and 25% by 2030, using 2018 as our baseline. And the goal is to achieve that, even though we're going to grow as a company and introduce new plants and new sites. So how are we getting there? I mean, we're increasing the use of renewable energy in various countries. And we're always looking for, new technologies. We're always doing a lot of R&D work on new technologies to help us reduce our carbon footprint. And so something like electrically heated steam crackers. We're trying to convert power to steam. So using electric heat pumps to generate the steam, and then we use that waste heat at our sites. Looking at ways to use bio-based feedstocks so that we're not having to use fossil fuels, and then just finding efficiencies within our operations. So at BASF Canada, we're looking at all of these things, but then as well, our plants and sites are doing everything from like replacing LED lighting to R&D on the feasibility of some larger impact projects. And then we're working together with them. We have the luxury, of course, of, because we're global, we can talk to other partners in other countries, in the USA and Mexico, certainly, to see what are they doing to reach their goals. So we've been, sharing best practices and working with plants and sites throughout North America to start, and then, who knows? And we also work with Bullfrog Power. So we have several of our sites, and, this is obviously an offset, but we're using green power and green electricity at 5 of our sites in Canada. So those are some of the ways that we're looking to get there. Hope that answers your question. Yeah.
It does, yeah, and I would love to hear from Gonzalo, and then maybe we can, because you mentioned it's an offset, but with a half-heartedly, and I think that's an important point, that actually some of those goals, you will have to use offsets. And I think it's unrealistic to think otherwise. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
over to you, Gonzalo.
Okay, in Iberdrola, what we are gonna do is continuing investing in renewables. There is a question here in the chat that say that why are not supporting nuclear energy? Not Iberdrola, but in general. I think the energy transition all over the world, but especially in Europe, is accelerating for two reasons. One is climate policies, but the other is the technological revolution of clean solutions, mainly of renewables. So I think people are not aware of that renewables have undergone a technological revolution with a subsequent consequent reduction in cost. So as a result, today, wind and photovoltaic are the cheapest way to produce electricity in 90% of the world. And nowadays, nuclear is not competitive. And this is a big change for the energy sector, because for the first time, we have a technology that are renewables that are at the same time cheap and clean. And this allows us to decarbonize the whole electricity system, but to help to decarbonize the rest of the economy. So it was mentioned transport. Transport now with batteries, the reduction of cost is similar. And we are going to see that electric cars are going to be more competitive in just 2 or 3 years. But in heating of buildings, heat pumps are competitive and more competitive, and the electricity price in the medium term are going to go down. So this is a revolution. So for this reason, we are going to invest more and more renewables. Our plan is to invest 150 billion euros over just 10 years and 75 billion euros in 5 years. So we are going to invest in renewables. We are going to multiply per 3 our capacity in renewables. We are going to invest in networks, because you need networks to integrate renewables. We are going to invest in digital intelligence and innovative solutions for clients. We are going to invest in green hydrogen. And this is very important, because we will see a process of electrification of the whole economy. However, for certain industries, electricity can play a role there, because you need very high temperature in the processes. And for this reason, we are going to use green hydrogen produced with renewables to decarbonize industry that use hydrogen as a raw material, or to decarbonize activities that are difficult to electrify. And for this reason, we plan to invest 600 megawatts of green hydrogen by 2025. And additionally, we are gonna develop strategic alliances with other companies in a variety of sectors working to a decarbonized world. For instance, we are going to have an alliance with companies traditionally involved in the production of oil to develop offshore wind projects. At the same time, for the electrification of industrial processes, we are gonna have partnership to deliver heat pumps, electric boilers, with all renewable sources. We are gonna create green hydrogen business to deliver projects to remove existence in a broad range of companies. We are going to support zero emissions mobility. So we are reaching alliances with leading car manufacturers globally. And in general, we are gonna be an essential part of the decarbonization process through electrification with renewable energies. Thank you.
Excellent, Gonzalo. I think that all companies who have operations in countries where you generate electricity will be very thankful for all the projects in the pipeline. And I think this is another important point you make, and that we should probably go back to about green hydrogen and just kind of how how the financing of new technologies would happen in the transition. But I just also wanted to give the floor to Katerina about achieving net zero in an industrial conglomerate using a lot of raw materials.
Well, our main aim is towards 2040, when we aim to be climate neutral company and a circular business, and also be recognized as leaders in ethical and responsible business. So we have created subsets of that. Obviously, by 2030, we're going to do only electric vehicles. By 2025, measuring from 2018, we are going to reduce our tailpipe emission by 50%, have our operational emissions reduced by 25%, another 25% reduction in the supply chain emissions, and then also doing about 25% minimum recycled and bio-based plastic in our vehicles, 40% recycled aluminum, and 25% recycled steel. So some of the specifics we are working on in this is we are actioning sustainability across our value chain in all parts of our business, which includes our partners. So by 2025, we also expect our tier one suppliers to be 100% renewable, using 100% renewable energy. We're exploring fossil-free steel. Someone mentioned aluminum earlier. We're trying to source low-emission aluminum. We're looking into conscious materials and bio-based materials. So there's a ton of different activities going on from that perspective. But we're also looking at the ethical side. So we have position papers on human slavery, to have conscious sourcing, to reduce or to prevent, I should say, child labor. We're looking at increased material utilization degrees, so mud. We're constantly working on not having waste, and then any waste we have is being recycled and reused. We're looking at remanufacturing, refurbishing, repurposing everything. And we actually do work in our cantinas. We track food waste and trying to minimize that. We trace origin of material of all our ingoing components all the way back to the mining source to ensure that it's consciously mined, consciously sourced, but then also looking into how do we harvest these materials going forward, those precious materials, making sure that they get reharvested and going back into the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. These are a lot of challenges ahead of you. For sure. I guess just wanted to follow up on kind of what would make it kind of, what do you want to see more of for the extraction of materials and for kind of the, I guess these in the design of the product, what's in your remit to recycle more of those materials, because mining in itself is it's a very dirty process, and as you said, well, we need to keep those resources, but what's necessary for that?
Well, I think we're trying to minimize the use of any kind of material like that, but obviously going towards electrification more and more, we know today that we're going to need some of those precious metals. With that said, it's important looking forward to once you discard a product or a component, that you harvest those precious metals from that to make sure that you don't have to remine for 100% of what is needed going forward, so that you don't let them go to waste in not any little crumb, so to say. I think that's extremely important, so that we are when we do tap into the earthly resources, that we are very conscious, we treat it as something really precious throughout the whole value chain and try and reinsert it in the beginning again. Margaret mentioned, talked about farming. Obviously, we're trying to get all our facilities on 100% renewable energy. We've been running on hydrogen to an 80% generically, but then we have, new facilities that we recently opened. We're trying to get to 100% everywhere, and that's different challenges in different parts of the world. But I want to say, we use gas to heat our paint shop here in the US as an example. So we're looking to use biogas from a nearby farm. So that's the purest form of gas, and that sort of close the local ecosystem, which I think is quite a beautiful solution.
Great, thanks, Katarina. It's really encouraging to hear that, that many of you have nearly thought about and are implementing the concept of circularity in the business model and circular economy. But I guess it's important to engage all stakeholders, but probably having the will from the senior leaders is key, and monetizing, or rather putting a value on that sustainability is circularity in the business model. So going back to metrics that other corporates can implement, I wanted to hear from Flemming on your opinion and experience of the implementation of sustainability linked remuneration for senior leaders, for the board of companies. How effective are those?
Sure. So we have our Mission Zero program, which we launched in 2019. And you could say that a couple of the things that we did to sort of ensure that hopefully this program is successful was actually to roll out a sales bonus to all our salespeople, so that today they will actually be measured now, and then the bonus they're going to get paid out, they'll be measured on how much of, you can say, the green technology we sell. So of course we have 800 different products. Some of them of course offer much more in terms of decarbonization, energy efficiency, and so on. So we've done a ranking of all the products, and now actually the sales bonus is tied that you sell more of the great equipment. And then a little bit down the road, we'll start out of those 800 products, we can do this product pruning, get rid of the products that offers the least. And it has been a tremendous success with all of our salespeople. They're super happy about this. Of course, they say, yeah, but we need the go-to-market thing and all of that. So that's great. It creates, I would say, really positive conversation around actually making sure that we sell more of what is the green stuff, right? So that's the sales bonus. That has been a huge success. Then we did the same, you could say, for sort of the top 200 in the company, both in terms of what is the short-term incentive program and also what is the long-term incentive program, which also is tied together now with our sustainability program. And what we do next year is actually then all employees actually next year will have a KPI that's tied to the same program around our sustainability target. So I think we've done it in a very short span of time, but of course, again, you need to see where you get most bang for the buck. And that was with the sales organization, because for us, the mission sits with our customers. So we start with sales. Then we started with the top executives, the top 200. And now next year, we will have actually the entire company who will have specific KPIs to support all of this. And, some of them, when we started in 2019, was sitting a little bit on the fence and were not sort of overly convinced about this is a great thing to do. But if nothing else, their bonuses is something at least that they have, very close to their hearts, right? So at least a lot of people are super enthusiastic and will do this anyway because it's the right thing to do. But some of those guys who are sitting a little bit on the fence is now, if nothing else, convinced also by just literally following the money.
Following the money is always a good way to go, or an effective way to go most times. And I think you also, an important point for all the listeners from other corporates is to assess where the most impact, such as sustainability linked remuneration, can have. As you said, you started with sales, because of your customers.
And it's important to say, of course, you get a really healthy dynamic, let me use that word, that you need to do kind of a mainstreaming of all of this. So everybody owns it, otherwise it doesn't fly, right? And then that goes for all of that. But luckily, that's one of the good things about being a listed company, is that, of course, you know, all of our investors, whether that's private investors, big pension funds, institutional investors, others, right? This is one of the questions that always comes up, right? So that's where I think where we had, again, a really positive dynamic with the investor community over these last 2 years, right, in terms of aligning all these incentives, right? So people might come at it from different reasons, but it all points in the same direction, and I think that's a good thing.
Great, yeah. I actually, my next question is about the investor base, and I guess we've seen some historical examples recently of bold leaders trying to change or revamp strategy, but have not been necessarily met with all the enthusiasm from investors. So and in particular, all of you mentioned, so Gonzalo mentioned green hydrogen, and then Margaret also the engagement with farmers and thinking in systems, and these are certainly new technologies and new ways of doing business. So I wanted to ask you both, on your perspective, how can companies and senior leadership balance that pressure between delivering on new strategy, implementing new products, new ideas that may cause temporary turmoil or even potentially influence profitability or the price of the company, and the pressure to maximize shareholder value, given that there's a blessings and a curse of being a public company. So probably start with you, Margaret.
Sure. I think if there's one thing that I would love to say to the shareholder community, which I think is happening a lot from a wide range of senior leaders, it is to shift the dialogue from one of risk to one of resilience. Go back to the origins of the word sustainability, which was about sustaining the business. Sustainability in businesses was about sustaining the long-term viability of our organizations. And that is essentially that shift from a risk-based approach and a commitments and a compliance-based approach to a resilience framework and a resilience mindset as a company. And once you reframe what you're trying to do into that kind of a mindset, you look at ROI a little bit differently, because business as usual versus a climate smart or climate friendly or sustainability pathway is a false dichotomy. That is no longer what it is. Business as usual is at significant risk from climate. If we do not build resilience into our businesses, they will not thrive in the way they have in the past. So the idea that just ignoring sustainability is even viable and that you would have the success of the past is not true. And I think that the vast majority of shareholders are recognizing that. And senior leaders are certainly recognizing that value is created in different ways today than it was yesterday. And that there are ways to concretely show that in the work that we do as companies, in the priorities that we make around where we will invest, where we will change the business model, and what that new business model will be, including how we interact with customers, how we interact with every part of our own supply chain, how we interact with governments, how we interact with academic institutions. All the myriad of stakeholders are now part of the same system we're trying to change, as opposed to individuals we interact with only on one particular issue. And so I really think that shift from risk to resilience is at the core of a shareholder engagement strategy that's successful for a major CPG, and it can break down some false dichotomies.
Great, I love that shift to risk to resilience, and I want just kind of counter that though, even if there is understanding among shareholders, do you experience or see kind of the resilience of not the resistance rather of, but we need to make money, like you have to change, but at the same time keep being profitable, or kind of keep so because we see that in the corporate investor clash. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we do need to continue to be profitable in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And those things go together. And I think there's various different tactics you can take to approach that. I mean, one of the most obvious that we certainly take is to stacking the ROIs. So some projects that might have a short-term profitability turn explicitly stacked with those that might have a longer-term profitability, so that you're not saying, oh, let's only do the short-term things. Then maybe eventually we'll get to those ones that have an upfront cost. Again, that's not a strategic way to stack your initiatives as a company. If you link together items with different payback periods, you can get started with both the long-term payback and the short-term profitability together within a sustainability portfolio. I mean, there's lots of other different tactics and particular approaches depending on the shareholder, but that's a sort of an overall approach that I might point to.
I think that's a wonderful example and a piece of advice for corporates. Gonzalo, you been nodding your head. What else would you
No,
share?
I think that what Margaret said was, I fully agree with her. I think it's really interesting. I will say that interest of firms need to be aligned with the interest of society. And nowadays, the main interest of society, apart from COVID, is climate change. So, in the end, firms that have corporate strategies aligned with the fight against climate change end up being more profitable. Because, in general, politicians define policies aligned with the interests of society. So, we are seeing more and more climate policies all around the world. So, in our case, this was the case. We started 20 years ago investing in renewables because we realized that this was a big problem, and we have been very profitable. You know, in our case, only 13 years ago, we were the 8th energy company in Europe, and now we are the first because we have invested just in renewables, not in other, and we have closed all our coal facilities. Apart from that, it's true that we are seeing temporary turmoil. For instance, we are seeing now the crisis of raw materials and in particular of energy prices. But the International Energy Agency in the last World Energy Outlook has been very clear. Energy transition is the solution, not the cost to the current energy crisis. What we need is to accelerate the investing in renewables to reduce the energy dependency. But it's true that this situation is caused political and social turmoil. And in relation to raw materials, that is, I mean, the increase of prices is really important. We are going to see that investments, for instance, in renewables are going to be more expensive in these years. However, we think they will return to normal prices once there is a new balance between supply and demand. But this is an important question, and I think is something that will be discussed at the COP. Countries are seeing, or society is seeing, the importance of having access to raw materials and own energy. And for this reason, we think that we will see a return of public policies supporting local jobs and local industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Again, it's I think it's an important message that being aligned with the interest of society today means being aligned with climate, and means there's no space for BAU, as Margaret said, anymore. with the mention of COP and cognizant of our time for the panel before we jump into audience questions, I would like to invite each of you to give me in one sentence. Obviously, problem of climate change is the problem of our century, but what is one single achievement that you wish to see signed off at COP26 that starts in a week? So maybe first, Eva.
Sure, thank you. So I would say it's not so much one single achievement, but I'd like to see action. So when you look at COP26, you realize this is the 26th year, the countries are coming together and talking about it. And this year does feel different. It feels like, there's as was mentioned, like there's a lot of public interest in Canada. I mean, climate change was a key issue in the recent federal election last month. So it does feel like there's a difference also that we're seeing like really the dramatic effects of inaction. So hopefully this year there will be some dramatic and lasting change made.
Hopefully. Fleming?
Yeah, point to one thing, of course, it's tricky, but if there were one thing, I think it would be, you could say, sort of an alliance to kind of mitigate methane gas, right? Because I think, of course, one thing is the methane gas coming from agriculture, but I think one thing that would keep me up at night is definitely also the methane gas from landfilling, right? And I think, huge parts of the world, landfilling is a terrible thing, right? And we know what we need to do, but I think that there's quite a lot of the methane gas coming from landfilling. So I think again, there's plenty of we could do there. So that would be one area.
Great, thank you. Yeah, methane seems to be a little bit overlooked and getting more and more attention now, but certainly very important. Katarina?
Yeah, like what Fleming said, we actually do zero waste to landfill, so we feel we're doing our piece there. But I want to see an alignment or signs on ramped up investments on renewable and clean energy, because it's such an imbalance in the world now where it's available and not. And so if you're in the business of doing business, you can't afford not to be sustainable, but it's actually in some areas is really hard. So we need to have a ramp up in that investment, and that is and then real actions in near term on that.
Need more Iberdrolas around the world, but
yeah,
certainly.
But if you go into election in a country, if you're an official, you can promise all kinds of things. You can promise that you're going to open up coal mines or whatever. Or you can say, now we're going to stimulate solar panel production in area X, Y, or something like that. So you have those means. So it's not just energy companies, but it's also countries and state officials.
Definitely. Gonzalo, you've unmuted yourself and we'll end with
we expect
Margaret.
a lot from the COP. We are principal partners of the COP, the Scottish Power. But to be honest, I think for me, the important thing at the COP will be to realize, to make a balance and to visualize the change we have experienced this last year. So in the past, I remember COP21 in Paris was like the big event, but in the last year, we have seen very good and very positive developments. We have seen the US back to the process. We have seen that 9 out of the 10 biggest economies in the world have presented plans or proposals to decarbonize their economies for mid-century. We are seeing this technological revolution. We are seeing a growing social support to climate change policies. So I think that what we expect from the COP is it's a good time to visualize what has been done and to move forward to create new alliances to accelerate the process. But let's be prudential, and because we don't see like in the next 15 days big announcement from new countries. This is my view.
Thank you, Margaret.
I would jump in and say very concretely to finalize Article 6 so that we can have a really credible international emissions trading scheme. We can have some rules of the road. so that we can actually invest in the reductions where they make the most sense and take a systems approach to this. I mean, Article 6 is really critical, and it has the potential to reduce the cost of implementing the contributions under the Paris Agreement by more than half. If there's one thing I'd like to see, that's it.
Can I ask you one question, Margaret? Do you think with a international carbon price, things are going to change? Imagine a carbon price of $10 per ton. Aren't you going to change your strategies? Or do you think this is enough?
Well, it's certainly not enough, but I think that there's a lot of different things in Article 6 that just basically can set some of those rules of the road, a framework for climate cooperation, a framework for investing at the right level in the places where investment is most needed by those entities that are ready to invest and that are being held to account by our shareholders. And so I'm not sure if it's the specific carbon price, certainly, but the myriad of things in that, I think, would significantly help progress.
Thank you.
There's no single thing that will solve the crisis. It's everything all together yesterday.
Yeah, I fully agree, and you referred to the time frame, Margaret, twice as yesterday, and it's certainly true. But few of you, and I think all of us, are really, we just need to see action at COP26, because we've heard enough and of pledges, but we just really need to be moving faster. Well, fantastic discussion. Thank you for all your input. It's now time for the Q&A. We already have a couple of questions in the chat, and Gonzalo, you kind of opened it up there with the carbon price. So actually, one of the first questions is Jonathan Dunn asks, "I'd be interested if anyone has on the panel has been any good ways of measuring and tracking embedded carbon." And I would add to that kind of the challenges of introducing an internal carbon price once you measure the embedded carbon. So I don't know who of you wants to take a stab at that. Eva, possibly?
Sure. So we have developed an internal system called Project Carbon Footprint, but we measure the carbon of all of our products, and we put, I don't know what, some 49,000 products through this accounting framework. And so we figured out, including embedded carbon, like what is the actual emissions of this throughout its life cycle. We've done that for every product. So the idea is eventually to move to a point where we can share that information, certainly with our salespeople, but also with our customers, to say that this is exactly how much you can shrink your carbon footprint by using this product, and how much you can shrink your water, and that will include embedded carbon as well. So I don't know if I can explain technically how it works. We haven't quite gotten to the point where we're, kind of being public about it. But the idea is also that we would share how we've measured it with other companies that are interested in using the same technology for their own products, in addition to obviously then using it to sell our own products. We've used that to kind of help. So we have what we call accelerator products. And then we have challenge products. So we've set a goal, like accelerator products are those that help people decrease their carbon footprint, other things, reduce accidents. And there's, the whole sustainability spectrum. And then we've assessed, kind of the worst products. So the idea is to move, we have a goal of, 28% of accelerator sales by a certain year. So the idea is to sell more of the kind of carbon reducing products and less of the not so reducing products.
And that's really intriguing. Kind of classify where you would get more revenue for less carbon. Fleming, you have your hand up. You want to?
Yeah, just maybe do a slightly different sort of stab at sort of the thinking on embedded carbon, and that is that if we look, for instance, at the built environment or our infrastructure, right? So most of the buildings we operate within and the ones we're building now, whether you're in Europe, North America, China, other big parts of the world, the carbon associated with the building actually comes from the building itself and the construction of it and the materials, right? Somewhere between 80 to 90 something percent is there, right? So that's maybe where we need, it's great what Gonzalo and others are doing in terms of the power generation, and what we've done on energy efficiency has been really, truly amazing. But then we need to shift the focus then on where are the emissions, and they would then be embedded in the buildings, in the infrastructure, whatever they are. But also, again, looking at the automotive industry, you can see, and I drive myself an electric vehicle, right? But the true sort of carbon payback on it, of course, depends on how has that electric vehicle now been produced and where the material is coming from. And if you look at the carbon associated with 1 ton of copper, 1 ton of aluminium, and so on, it's a huge span, basically, where you're sourcing these materials from. The same goes for what is then the carbon associated whenever you produce a wind turbine. And that's also where we need to change our focus and create the positive incentives, right? So if I take 2 electric vehicles that I was looking at myself, one of them had a carbon payback time of 7 years, the other one of 2 years. Just simply almost 2 identical cars, but basically based on where do they get the sourcing of the material from, right? And I think that there you see a maturity within automotive, which has done quite a lot. But I think the energy sector, I'm based in Denmark, where of course you produce quite a lot of wind turbines, and I think there's a little bit of an industry that's trailed a little bit behind, because we all love wind energy. But sure, but a wind turbine is consisting of steel, of copper, of aluminium, rare earth, zinc, nickel, and so on. And none of these materials don't come with challenges, right? So that's also where we need to maybe slightly change a little bit of our focus to that part of the embedded carbon.
Thank you, Flemming. Yeah, it's I guess one important point with embedded carbon, and particularly cement, and is just build materials that generate carbon, but then they would keep the carbon in and not re-emit it as buildings currently do. There's another question here in the chat, which is also to all of you. Have the corporations in the panel established clear mechanisms and decision-making collegiates to integrate and align ESG and R&D/innovation programs and goals? Could you exemplify? So if I understand the question correctly, it's like, how do you integrate and align ESG, I guess, /sustainability with R&D and innovation? I think we've touched on that a little bit with some of the new technologies that Iberdrola is looking at. I don't know, Gonzalo, if you have any thoughts in particular.
If it's possible, I saw another question that is interesting from Pervin Toledano on partnership with academia and university. I think is really important. For us, I mean, the challenge of decarbonization of the whole economy is so huge that no one can do it alone. Firms, we cannot do it alone. Government can do it. NGOs can do it, and universities. So I am more and more convinced that the only way to really move forward and to face this challenge is through alliances between firms, governments, NGOs, and universities. So I'm sure, I see you are nodding, because we are developing some alliances with universities, but I think it's not enough. We need to work on more alliances with other industries. For instance, with hydrogen, for us is to work with other industries. We were just focusing on the electricity sector, and we need to work with but to work with universities and their knowledge about, research and development and cost and so on, and to work with NGOs is so important, and to work with government. So I would like to stress, for me, I at the beginning, you asked me about enablers, and one is policies, and the other is alliances, and of course with universities. Sorry, I didn't ask your question, but I like this one.
I'll try to answer a little bit of both and jump in there on your comments, Gonzalo.
Thank you.
You know, one thing I think about when I think about these kinds of university and academic partnerships is the necessity of them to take our global commitments to local action. We're looking at food supply chains. We source across 60 different countries, lots of different products. And there's no way that the same kinds of actions on a half a hectare potato farm in Thailand is going to be the same as a 20,000 hectare oat farm in Canada. You know, they need different kinds of local implementation that is going to be the most critical climate levers that those farmers can do. And so that's where you need those academic partnerships at a local level, as well as those academic partnerships at sort of a more global level to set the policy and to set the right kinds of goals as the ultimate impacts that you're looking for. So when we've recently set goals, we've set them on impact, not on do a certain number of practices or certain practices. We've said drive the impact, which is pretty new in the agricultural sector that has for a long time been in the world of certifications and practice-based standards. And so in order to credibly know what to do at any given local level, in any kind of R&D process, we need to know what is going to locally drive that impact. And so that's where we really need those kinds of partnerships with local municipalities, with local universities, with local, they might be NGOs, they might be independent agronomists, whatnot. There's a lot of different kinds of players that can help with that age-old international development problem of global commitments, local action, which is absolutely a corporate problem when we come to this also, is how to drive the most impactful actions at each individual location within the larger system. I mean, you have to think always at all of those different scales. The other thing I'd add to that comment is that we keep talking about change as if there's a single lever, but we see more than ever when we're trying to work with rural communities around the world, it's not a financial lever alone. It's also a human lever. I mean, these are each and every single farm in our network is their own individual small business. And so how do you work with that many small businesses to help them make those kinds of human decisions and cultural decisions about how they're going to run their operation? It's also an ecological system. So if you think about it as financial and human and ecological, you also need that ecological expertise and know-how to really drive the right kinds of actions for the environment. And so we have to bring those three pieces together in the way that we take action. And I would suggest that most sectors have to think about the three different levers of change. And for that, we need academia, we need policymakers, we need NGOs, we need them all.
So great points, Margaret, and probably just to kind of in summary then, think globally, act locally. Katrina, I see you have your hand up. I'm not sure whether you want to jump on that discussion and question.
No, I think it's super important to have these collaborations with the universities and research sector. We're part of Ellen MacArthur Circular Economy Foundation because I think we all learn as we go along. It's such a complex subject, sustainability, and we learn more about materials, we learn about resources continuously, and one size does not fit all. And what's cool with sustainability is that it really breaks the boundaries of traditional partnerships. What you're seeing now is coalitions between different sectors and different kind of companies who typically, traditionally would never partner together, which is great. One thing I want to see out of COP26 is also a depolarization of this subject. Sustainability is too important to be highly politicized and polarized as it's been. It's been a political bath. We can't afford that. So there's so many initiatives in being announced ahead of COP26, during, and then in the wake of it. I'm hoping that everyone will understand sustainability is part of our new normal, and it's an integral part of that business. And when it is, I think that's when we can really make a difference, because then we get over that debating hurdle, preferably. I also wish that we could show how much number crunching is behind the scenes. There's a lot of window dressing going on in sustainability in certain areas, and to a certain extent greenwashing. But to really are what you say you are is enormous amount of data crunching. We have a CO2 walk that's supposed to take us to the targets that we have set. And in that walk, every single thing that we do in our footprint, in our operations, in our sourcing, in our business partnership is calculated and accounted for that. And each one of those have an action. Someone mentioned impact earlier. What impact does each one of these activities have, and how much CO2 contribution does it have? It's not something you can easily market towards laymen, but it's very important, and it goes on behind the scenes, and everyone plays a role in that. So very complex. One size does not fit all. Great collaborations are needed across all borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. And you raise a point which I think is so critical as sustainability becomes mainstream, because certainly in the investment space, we see that now everyone's been doing ESG and everyone's been considering green businesses, and I think it's really critical to ensure the credibility of all those pledges, and as you said, kind of go into detail. And earlier, Margaret actually mentioned something to which all of you kind of nodded your heads about the fact that we end up doing a lot of reporting and not enough time is left for action. And I can certainly second that, being on the other side of the table as an investor who also needs to report a lot. And I guess my question is how do we solve that challenge? It's like we need the reporting and the transparency, but how do we align the metrics or automate some of that? Kind of where do you see the future of that, so that the sustainability professionals can do more of the action, because we clearly need it.
You know, I was thinking when you have the IT bubble, you have people who can hack into Langley, etc. There's these whiz kids out there who can create programs for anything. If the drive is hard enough on sustainability and we can show that incentives are large enough, I think someone will write that perfect formula for certain parts of our businesses. If you can calculate and optimize your logistic supply chain, for instance, from the lowest carbon, etc., those are some of the things that we could certainly use. If we had more sophisticated formulas like that, we would put the facts in and get some of the answers out, rather than maybe spending all this reporting as was referenced. I just think blue economy is slowly catching up to the rest of the economy. And when it does, I think investments in those who support that kind of thing, just like research for medical issues, etc. Someone will come up with those things, and that will certainly alleviate the heavy reporting.
So technologies as one solution. Any other views on that?
I wanted just to maybe echo kind of on that front, right? So all of our equipment, of course, is very physical, but there's also a digital component to all of it with a ton load of sensors. We have all kind of software tools where we monitor the performance of the equipment. And we're trying to actually now offer that to the customer, so you automatically account for all the energy consumption, the water consumption, stuff like that, right? And that data points feed into sort of the ERP systems of the companies and what have you. And that might be a little bit of a wishful thinking from my end, but I think we can actually do that. And that's also coming back to the universities. Then we need, you can say, the brightest of some of those people at the universities to go and work for the companies on this panel here, right? Because we're the ones every day trying to decarbonize the world, and then stop having this pipe dream of going to work for big tech. We're going to promote online porn, gambling, and videos with cats in it. So if you are these smart people who can do these algorithms, which I think is great, come and work for me, come and work for the other companies on this panel. But for God's sake, don't work on stuff that promotes ridiculous things online.
That's a great piece of advice for all the students that are probably
Yeah.
on the panel. I think we have just time for one or two more questions. Margaret, there's a question to you in the chat as to kind of the challenges between water management. The question says the charges that you're draining, that PepsiCo is draining supply in India and threatening farmers growing food for the population. And clearly that's, I mean, farming requires a lot of water. So, but there's also balancing of all these inputs. So if you want to take that briefly.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy to respond briefly before we close. I think, you know, all around the world, watershed health is of critical importance to us. And what that watershed health means in different places is a little bit different. In India, we've done a tremendous amount around water use efficiency in farms. We've done a tremendous amount around safe water access for people, often in similar regions. And as you acknowledged, farming does take a huge amount of water, particularly of the fresh water of the world. And so we are committed to ensuring not only that we're using that water extremely efficiently, introducing drip irrigation, finding the business case for women's empowerment within agriculture around water use efficiency, stacking together lots of the different livelihood goals within those rural areas in India. But it also means looking at the watershed more holistically and understanding where agriculture fits within a watershed, working with local municipalities, working with state governments in India, working with the federal government around what is the water goal in that context and how can PepsiCo play a positive role while we are producing food for many people in that country, from the farmers in that country and helping to those smallholders, primarily smallholders, tens of thousands who are producing primarily potatoes for some of the potato-based brands there in India. So we're working a tremendous amount with them on livelihoods, on water, on overall sustainable farming practices. As I spoke to earlier, taking those global goals and making them local, understanding what the challenges are in each different place within India and how we work with all the different actors in those places to make really coherent progress that works for people, works for the environment.
Great, thank you, Margaret. I think with that, we'll just summarize some of the great points that all of you have made in terms of different metrics. Is kind of incentivize everyone in the company, as Fleming said, that everybody owns it. Communicate clearly and effectively with all your stakeholders, not only investors, but also make sure that metrics are aligned so that the reporting burden on everyone hopefully goes down. And we see a lot of action in the EU on that. And I think all of you have really alluded to the need of alliances, because climate is a global problem, but solutions need to be local and need to be in alignment with everyone. And most of all, action. We really need to put our money where our mouth is and do the walk, because we're running out of time, quite literally now and a bit more metaphorically. So with that, thank you all for joining today. Thank you for the great contributions and for sharing your journey, and thanks for all the engaging questions and the listeners who stuck with us. So Brooke, I think we're even like a minute early. So
yes, thank you very much to all of you. Thanks so much for moderating. We're now going to introduce a 30-minute break just for people to check email, get something to eat, have a coffee. And we have our final panel joining us at 12:30 Eastern time, US Eastern time. So that's 30 minutes from now, where we'll talk about climate finance. So thinking about how we're structuring the financing of all of these objectives and where hurdles are and where we're sort of headed in that direction. So it will be a good panel to end with, but I look forward to having everyone back. You can stay on the link that you're on right now and step away, and we'll just start at 12:30, or you can sign back in using the same link. So thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.